Welcome to the channel, everyone. On this channel, we share stories of average Joes around the world and their not so average issues. Let's start with the first story. Fiancé, who left me before marriage, comes back and begs for forgiveness. Says that he left for this reason. Should I give him a second chance? No, I wasn't stranded at the altar a minute before the wedding. But I did get deserted by my fiancé in the middle of wedding preparations, and I'm having a hard time seeing who's the bad guy in this situation. Let me start you off by giving you some background details about our relationship. I'm 29 female, and my fiancé, ex now, is 24 male. Yeah, I'm older than him by a couple of years, and apparently this was a bigger problem than I realized. You'll understand why later. However, as per my knowledge, our age has never been an issue. It's only 5 years. I know many couples who are spread farther apart. My fiancé has never shown any signs of discomfort with my being older than him before. Regardless, we've had a smooth sailing relationship for the most part. I knew my fiancé far before we started dating, essentially because we grew up in the same neighborhood. I was never actually friends with him, but I did babysit his little brother for a summer when I was around 15. Fast forward a few years later, I find out he's moved to the same city as me for college through a mutual friend of ours. It was through this friend that we had our first proper meeting. People from the same town gotta stick together, right? Even though I was in my last year and he was in his first, something clicked. We started meeting up frequently without the rest of our friends in the picture. Meeting turned into dating, and before I knew it, I was in a committed relationship. Now, I won't overwhelm you with the fluffy details, but the first few months were sweet and wonderful, to say the least. He was unlike any of my previous boyfriends, and I think I knew right from the get-go that this would end up being a relationship that would actually last. I graduated and spent the next 2 years working in the same city. We moved in together, all was well and good. It was when I was 26 that I decided to pursue a postgraduate degree after my 2-year break. At this point, I was starting to feel stable enough to apply to universities elsewhere. Long story short, we started dating long distance as my boyfriend went back to hometown following graduation to stay close to his sick mother. Unfortunately, his mother had been diagnosed with a terminal illness that required her to go back and forth between hospitals a lot. My boyfriend's father at the time had moved on with his new wife to a different life, and his brother was on the verge of graduating high school, so he had no option but to stay behind, get a job, and take care of his mother. Even though maintaining a long-distance relationship was hard, we managed through frequent visits, the magic of FaceTime, etc. I have to mention that I was making new friends in this new city, some of whom were married, some of whom were working steadily towards their dream careers, as was I. I didn't bother holding back from talking about this to my boyfriend. This meant that I was basically making huge steps in my personal life and career while he wasn't. I'm not trying to put him down by making that statement. It's just an observation of how things were. Time skipped to 2 years later. After having finished my master's, I came back home to spend time with my family and my now fiancé. Yes, sometime in the last year, my boyfriend had made a surprise trip to propose to me. Of course I said yes. Look back at it, I suspect that the proposal might not have been as perfect as it seemed. Maybe it was the fact that life was moving too fast for me compared to him, but I think that it must have motivated the surprise proposal. So, here we were, 29 and 24, ready to be married. My coming back home was the perfect timing. Fiancé's mother expressed a desire to see her son happily married, and I had no plans of moving away anytime soon. Luckily, we were able to get hold of a wedding planner and begin preparations. We didn't want an over-the-top wedding. Both fiancé and I had just enough saved for a small but fulfilling ceremony. My parents pitched in to help wherever we were falling short. It was a little more hurried than I imagined, but it was finally happening. I was as happy as I could be. I'd always hoped to be married by 30 and have kids by 35, as I've always wanted to be a mother. It was all coming together, but it was too good to be true. A month before the wedding date was when everything went downhill. Invitations had been sent out and our wedding arrangements were in full swing when I realized that I had missed my period that month. I was also feeling quite sick at the time. So I chalked it up to the obvious and bought the pregnancy test, the simultaneously anticipated and dreaded pregnancy test. First 2 tries, positive. Third try, negative. Me, in confusion. So I decided to make an appointment with the doctor before going around telling anyone. First of all, the pregnancy turned out to be a false alarm. The stress of wedding planning had led to poor diet and dehydration over the last few months, which in turn took a toll on my menstrual cycle. I was relieved, but a little disappointed. Either way, I decided to not make a big deal out of it. Little did I know, though, in the time that I had been absent from the apartment, my fiancé had used his spare key to drop off some groceries I had asked for earlier. You can guess what happened next. He took one look at the pregnancy test that I had carelessly left by the toilet, made his own assumptions, and fled. And by fled, I mean he fled. He booked it to another city, a month before we were to be married. Yep. I don't need to tell you that I was heartbroken and devastated. I don't need to tell you that I was worried sick when he disappeared into thin air. A few hours later, he called his mother to assure her that he was safe, but that he would not be coming home. He needed time and space to think. She relayed his message to me, and that's when the anger kicked in. The pain of having someone you love vanish on you without an explanation is indescribable. It's maddening. Of course, I figured that he must have seen the pregnancy test and that it must have triggered him somehow. But what left me fuming was the fact that this guy had chosen to spend the rest of his life with me, but had run away at the possibility of having an actual baby? Yeah, I was mad and upset. I started spreading word about how my fiancé was a coward and a fool. Since we shared the same friends, most of them were sympathetic towards me and resented him. I was the abandoned bride-to-be after all. On the other hand, my fiancé had started calling and texting me again a few weeks later, begging for a conversation. He had learned from his mother that the pregnancy was a false alarm. Now he wanted to talk. I ignored everything. Obviously, I heard that he was staying with a friend in another city. Unfortunately, the jerk couldn't be away too long as his mother still needed him. So, finally, he came back home. He came knocking on my door, saying he was ready to talk about it and that he was sorry I drew conclusions. He panicked. Excuses? But I still had feelings for him. I let him in. Wrong move. Talking turned into a huge argument. Fiancé blames me for leaving the pregnancy test around and giving him a big scare. I ask him why it was a scare in the first place. If he was getting ready for marriage, why not a baby? He says he's too young for it and that he's not ready to be a father yet. Then I ask him why he proposed in the first place, and he gets frustrated and says it's because of my older age he felt pressured to do so. He continued to yell at me for using this as an opportunity to ruin his reputation in front of his friends and family, as none of them want to associate with him anymore. He says I'm an a-hole for letting them all believe he's a bad person for leaving. And most of all, he says I'm an a-hole for not giving him a second chance because all of this was just a misunderstanding. From my point of view, I'm just looking out for myself. I see no point in continuing a relationship with someone who's clearly threatened by my age and only feels obligated to carry out big commitments because of it. Yes, I still love him and have feelings for him, but I'm trying to make an objective decision. So help me out here. Am I an a-hole for not taking him back? Did I really ruin his friendships and his reputation? Because, in my opinion, that was all his doing. And if you think that I should give this relationship a second shot, why do you think so? I went off at my mother after she babysat my son and told her she wasn't allowed to see him anymore. Am I in the wrong? I'm 39 male with a 10-year-old son. Due to COVID restrictions in the last year, I've had to work from home a lot and so has my wife. So, tensions are already high between us as we're both constantly stressed and irritated. When you add a 10-year-old to the mix, yeah, it only makes the situation worse. My son is a single child, so he doesn't have anyone else to play with at home, apart from me and my wife. Naturally, he keeps venturing in during our work hours, complaining about being bored. He's quite spoiled, so he'll often cause a ruckus in order to get our attention. We haven't been coping very well with this, so my wife and I decided that we should send him away for winter break to his grandparents' house. Since my wife's parents live in another city that's quite far away, the closest option was my mother's place. No other choice. I wasn't really happy with this decision, and I'll tell you why. My mother was never the nicest parent growing up, to put it gently. She was strict, but not in a good way. My mother never tolerated misbehavior or mischief and made sure to dole out harsh punishments to enforce absolute discipline in the household. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with wanting to teach your child to be good, but my mother's the kind who goes the extra mile to send a message. Growing up, I was often put in dark closets for hours on end or locked out of the house in cold whenever I disappointed my mother. I'm not going to say there was any physical abuse, but being forced to go without food for a whole day because of a bad grade can be scarring when you're a child. You get the gist. My mother's not the kindest soul around, and my father was too preoccupied with his job to notice the verbal and mental abuse being inflicted. Naturally, I'm hesitant to leave my son alone with her. Sure, she's mellowed out as she's grown old, but she's still a stern woman. I've always tried to limit my son's interaction with his grandmother so as to keep them trauma-free. I don't think I've ever left them together unsupervised. Naturally, I'm wary about doing that now. But having no other option at the moment, my wife and I agreed to leave him there for 2 days first and see how it goes. I was hoping that my mother would have softened up over the years, especially towards her own grandson, but I was wrong. I went to pick him up after 2 days at his grandmother's. First thing I find is my son crying and running to hug me the second I enter. Second thing I see is my mother standing with a bag of my son's clothes and her car keys. I ask my son what's happening and he says that grandma had gotten angry at him for playing in the snow and getting it all over her kitchen floor even after she had warned him not to. So, grandma decided an appropriate punishment for such a crime would be to pretend to drive him off to an orphanage because that's where bad boys who don't listen well are abandoned. Now, he's scared and miserable at the idea of being taken away from home forever. You can imagine how furious I was upon hearing this. It was one thing to have grown up with these disciplinary measures myself, but to impose them on my son? Yeah, I was beyond angry. So I lost control and started shouting at my mother in front of her grandson. I basically told her that she was not allowed to see my son again, at which point she started looking super hurt and explained that she was only trying to teach him a lesson. She thinks that I'm overreacting and that she shouldn't be deprived of seeing her grandson over something so small. When I continued yelling at her about all the stuff she put me through growing up, she basically tore up and said that I was being mean and harsh and that she was doing her best to raise me properly. I felt powerful at the moment when I was telling her off, but now that I look back at it, I wonder if I was being too hard by humiliating her and completely banning her from seeing her grandson again. What do you think? Am I in the wrong? Blowing up on a worker at a clothing store. Am I the a-hole? I'm a mother of a 17 female teenage girl. The last few years have been especially tough on my daughter appearance-wise. She barely escaped having a full-blown eating disorder as we were able to recognize patterns and encourage her into recovery before it was too late. She is in the process of healing and building a better self-image, and I'm very proud of her. The journey so far has been difficult and even harder to watch as a mother, and I will continue to support her no matter what. But I worry if I'm stepping over a line by being too protective of her. This happened a few days ago at Forever 21. I took my daughter shopping for new clothes as a reward for doing excellently in school lately. I was hoping to use this little trip to encourage her as she was having second thoughts about going to prom because she was worried about how she would look in a dress. So we went in and started looking around for cute things, and a young salesgirl started following us around in case we needed any help. At first, it was fine. She wasn't oh so pleasant, but she wasn't rude or anything. Until my daughter picked up a strawberry printed crop top to try on. And Missy straight up rolled her eyes, snatched the top from my daughter's hand, and went, "You're too big for this. Let me get you another size," all in this sarcastic tone. Well, I kind of lost it then. I blew up on her for her attitude, and a manager had to step in and calm me down. Later, my daughter hinted that what I did was embarrassing and that I shouldn't have blown up on the girl as she probably didn't mean anything harmful. Am I in the wrong for losing my cool at a young shop assistant? Should I have refrained from saying anything at all? We hope you enjoyed today's stories. Use the comment section below to state your verdict on the situation, express your opinions, and share some valuable advice.